Good evening, and welcome to Twilight Dance, a place where ancient stories and quiet mysteries drift through the night. Tonight, we explore something not fully understood. The water was calm, far calmer than expected for that time of night. There were no strong winds, no distant movement, just a quiet surface stretching outward into the darkness, reflecting only faint traces of moonlight. It looked still, almost perfectly still, and at first, that was all it seemed to be. Just another quiet shoreline, another moment where the world felt slowed down, softened, as if everything had settled into place. The kind of stillness that feels peaceful. The kind that makes you pause, even if only for a moment. But the longer they stood there, the more noticeable it became. The water wasn't just calm, it was unmoving, not in the usual way. Even the quietest lakes, the calmest oceans, carry something, small ripples, gentle shifts, subtle motion that reminds you the water is alive, always changing, always responding. But here, there was nothing. No drift, no variation, just a smooth, uninterrupted surface, stretching further than the eye could comfortably follow. And something about that felt slightly out of place. Not wrong, just different. They watched it for a while, without really thinking about it. Moments passed slowly, blending together as the quiet continued. The air remained steady, the shoreline unchanged, the same faint sounds of distant water resting against itself, though even that felt quieter than it should have been. It wasn't silence, just less movement, less sound, less variation. As if something had gently reduced the world around them, smoothing it out, removing the small imperfections that usually go unnoticed. And still, nothing disturbed the surface, not once, not even the smallest ripple. It wasn't until they shifted their focus, just slightly, that something else began to stand out. At first, it wasn't clear what had changed. The water looked the same. The light hadn't moved. The night remained still, just as it had been. But there was a feeling, subtle, difficult to place, as if something had been missed earlier, something that had always been there, but hadn't been fully noticed. And then, slowly, it became clearer, not on the surface, but beneath it. Far below, where the light faded into a darker shade, where the water became too deep to follow with the eye. There was something just barely visible. It didn't move, at least not in any way that could be easily seen. There were no sudden shifts, no clear outline, nothing that defined it completely. Just a presence, a shape that didn't fully separate from the darkness, and yet didn't blend into it either. It remained there, steady, quiet, almost as still as the water above it. And the longer they looked, the more difficult it became to ignore. Not because it was clear, but because it wasn't. It was too large to be a reflection, too deep to be something resting near the surface, and too consistent to be imagined. It didn't flicker. It didn't disappear when they looked away. It stayed, exactly where it was, as if it had been there long before anyone had arrived, resting beneath the surface, unnoticed, undisturbed, and perhaps meant to remain that way.
They remained there for a while, longer than they had intended, not out of concern or urgency, but because something about the stillness made it difficult to leave. The surface hadn't changed. The faint glow of the moon still rested gently across the water, soft and distant, broken only by the occasional shift in light as thin clouds passed overhead. And yet, beneath it, that presence remained, unmoving, unchanged.
It was easy to lose track of time. Moments seemed to stretch, blending together, as if the night itself had slowed, settling into a quieter rhythm. The usual sense of passing minutes, of subtle change, had faded. Everything felt steady, consistent, as though this place existed slightly outside the movement of everything else. And still, the water did not respond. They tried to focus elsewhere, on the shoreline, on the distant horizon, on anything that might break the quiet pattern that had settled in. But each time, their attention returned, not intentionally, just naturally, drawn back to the same point, just beneath the surface, where something remained, patiently, without explanation. It didn't feel like it was watching, or waiting, or even aware. It simply existed, in the same way the water existed, in the same way the night existed, part of the scene, yet separate from it. And that was what made it difficult to understand. Not what it was, but how easily it fit, without ever being fully seen. At times, it seemed as though the shape shifted slightly, not in movement, but in perception, as if the mind was trying to complete it, to define its edges, to make sense of something that didn't offer a clear form. But no matter how long they looked, it never became clearer. It remained just beyond certainty. The water above it stayed perfectly smooth, no sign of disturbance, no indication that anything rested below. And yet, the presence remained undeniable, not because it revealed itself, but because it didn't, because it held its place, quietly, without needing to be understood. Eventually, they stepped back, not suddenly, not out of discomfort, just slowly, as if the moment had reached its natural end. The shoreline remained the same, the air unchanged, the night still calm, still quiet, still exactly as it had been. And as they moved further away, the water began to feel more familiar again. Small ripples returned, barely noticeable at first, then more consistent, as if something had gently released its hold. The surface shifted, the reflections softened, everything resumed as expected. But even then, there was a quiet understanding, difficult to explain, and even harder to forget, that the stillness had not been empty, that the calm had not been ordinary, and that beneath the surface, where the light no longer reached, something had remained, unmoving, unseen, and perhaps still there. And as the night settles and the story fades, this has been Twilight Dance, where the unknown is never too far away. Good night.